The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2026. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back tonight for another live stream, live reading of a new book, a book we have not read before on the channel. We're embarking upon a new chapter in the Hayes Reviews learning journey tonight, and I am very glad indeed to have you tuning in live or watching on the replay, whichever one of those suits you, also suits me. How are you all doing? I hope you are having a good year so far. We're 9 days into it. Have you been making resolutions? Have you been dieting? Have you been detoxing? Have you gone back to work yet? Are you looking forward to the longer days and the warmer temperatures that are heading our way rapidly? I don't know about you, but it seems to me that time is speeding up and the years are flying by, and these last 6 months since my son was born have been absolutely no exception. It's been crazy. It's just gone boom like that, and suddenly he's sitting up and rolling around and falling off beds and climbing furniture and feeding himself, and it's just it's incredible to witness the transformation and in just 6 months. But yeah, time flies, so we have to be very careful about how we use it and how we spend it, or how we invest it is the word that I prefer to use. But we do talk about spending time. We talk about wasting time and killing time. It's better to think of it in terms of an investment, because an investment, you would like to think you'll get some sort of return, some sort of benefit further down the line. You make the investment now, and later on it pays dividends. You get some kind of remuneration. And that is fitting and appropriate to what we do here on the Hayes Reviews channel. This is a channel where we slow things down a little bit and we take some time to investigate and to look at some long texts and difficult books that were written many decades ago, sometimes 100 years ago. In fact, we did read a book that was over 100 years old on the channel. It was about the Rothschilds. And tonight we're starting a new book, and it's a new opportunity to get some good, proper, real learning done. Because in 2026, we are surrounded by misinformation, disinformation, and now there's a new category, which is just fake information with all this AI slop garbage that they're throwing at us. I was watching a podcast the other day, and it was the show was interrupted every 3 to 4 minutes with an AI advert. And it was some fake teenage girl asking some ridiculously buff Tai Chi guru about how quickly her 56-year-old dad could get into shape using Tai Chi. So the algorithms obviously think I'm about 15 years older than I actually am, which is worrying, because obviously I'm putting out the markers of someone who's in his mid-50s. Which is quite scary. And they really want me to do Tai Chi. And there's this sort of fake Tai Chi master telling people what, I don't know. And I don't know. It was just so frustrating and weird that I'm amazed that I actually made it through that video, because every time these interruptions came on, I just swore, and then I watched the countdown, and then I skipped it. But the video was very interesting. The video was actually about how ironically, the video was about how this computer scientist's theory that using LLMs and associated technologies could be opening portals through which we might be communicating with demons. That was literally the subject of the video, and YouTube decided to interrupt that video every 3 to 4 minutes with AI generated advertisements for Tai Chi. So that is the world we live in 2026. If that video sounds interesting to you, I downloaded it and re-uploaded it to my Telegram, so you can watch the whole thing uninterrupted there. It's very interesting indeed, and it's worth checking out because I think there's something to it. This AI stuff, it's creepy, it's uncanny, it is unnatural. It leaves me with a kind of disgusted feeling. It makes me feel a bit gross when I've used it. It's and I have used it. I've used it for a variety of purposes, and none of them have been especially helpful. It did help me get my continuity of control email series and website up and available to people who are interested in that. So I can credit GPT with, I used GPT to help me do that. But I've been using it to make these sort of cheat sheets for some of my readings. I take the transcript from the video, I put it into GPT, I tell it to do this whole analysis, and it spits this thing out. And at first they looked really good, but I was looking at one the other day, and the second point that it gave me on this cheat sheet was incorrect. I was looking at the page in the book that it was referring to, and it had just totally misunderstood or mischaracterized the information in the book. So these tools, they are not what they seem. They're being put out there for a purpose. They're tempting. They're addictive. They're alluring. But I think overall, every time we use them, there's a tiny slice of our collective humanity is lost. And so I'm carrying on with my mission in 2026 to bring real information from physical artifacts, otherwise known as books. Remember those? Those things that people used to use to learn from, that have lots of words in them, and people take great care to assemble their evidence and arguments in a logical format that you can follow from A to B to C and beyond. Remember that? The days when people would actually invest time and energy in creating something, a physical artifact that you could look at and learn from and write in, and you could digest it in your own time, and they weren't just trying to give you the bottom line. Because nowadays, whenever you use your search engine, you just get this AI summary of what you're supposed to think or what you're supposed to believe or what you're supposed to take away about that topic. And it's a shortcut that is going to leave us all dumber, lazier. It's going to leave us all more impatient. We are going to be more confused. We are going to have a less ability to parse bad information from factual, true information. It's a real dangerous, alarming time that we're living in. And so what I'm trying to do here on the channel is something that can remedy that. It's an opportunity for people to stretch their attention span. It's like going to the gym for your mind. And I'm not perfect. I forget a lot of the stuff that I read on the channel. Sometimes I go to bed after a live stream and I think, what the hell did I just read tonight? I can't remember any of it. But that's why the broadcasts are recorded. We can go back, we can listen to them, we can skip forwards, we can buy a copy of the book ourselves, we can make our own notes as we go along for things to look up and things to learn. The point is, if you don't use your brain, you lose your ability to think. And if you can't think, you're going to be controlled much more easily by the people out there who want to do that. The social engineers and the black sorcerers and the dark pedophile elites who just really want to get absolute and utter control, not only of your behavior, not only of your decision-making abilities, but control over every single cell in your body, control over your ability to reproduce and start a family, control over your thoughts, the very things that you think. your ability to perceive, your abilities to believe, to intuit. They want control over all that stuff because it seems to me that they want to make perfectly bland, monotonous, autonomous, programmed, repetitive, machine like human beings who don't have free will, don't take the time to consider, to interpret, to interact with reality. That's what these shortcuts do. It's a shortcut to the abattoir. It's a shortcut to the mass lobotomization, if that's even a word, of the human herd, right? And all the people that are using these, myself included, all these technologies, all the time we spend on screens and reading from Substack and watching this AI slop garbage that they put out in front of us, it's all harmful to a certain degree, and that's probably rich coming from somebody who is making YouTube videos and is live streaming over the internet. But it's true. It's something I've been reflecting on a lot over the Christmas period, where I had quite a nice break from my devices. I wasn't plugged into my Telegram channel, my YouTube. I didn't have my laptop. I went and stayed at home. I didn't have my smartphone. I still listened to a few podcasts here and there, but for the most part, I was just being with my wife, my son, and my family, and just being there in the room, looking around, enjoying it, spending time with the dog, playing with my son, opening presents, eating nice food, all that kind of stuff, just being in reality, So during that time, what I realized is it's actually quite nice. I actually don't miss obsessively checking Telegram groups for the latest essential information or the hot topic or the crazy thing that's happened now. I actually didn't miss a lot of the long group chat histories that I have to catch up on every time I log in. I actually didn't miss checking my emails or scrolling around on YouTube looking for responding to comments and all this stuff. I mean, I enjoy that stuff, but not having it was kind of nice. I have to say. So I suppose the lesson there is for anyone out there who's screen addicted, like me, like we all are. It's great to take time away from that when you can. I was listening to Jason Horsley recently. The last few days, I've listened to a bunch of his interviews, and I heard him say on one that every Lent he goes the whole of Lent unplugged from the internet, and I thought that was fantastic. He's got a big stack of books to keep him going. In fact, he mentions reading quite a lot and his stack of books. He had a good conversation with Herr Voyer from Geopolitics and Empire that went up a few days ago. And it was a really good chat. And he mentioned there that at some point he might have to just completely disengage from the internet, from this virtual kingdom, as he called it. And he said, but I'll be all right because I've got this massive stack of books. I've got my 7 acres of land. He's got some goats, I think, and a vineyard to look after. And so for him, that unplugging from the fake digital realm isn't so scary. So the point there is get yourself a good stack of books to read just in case you do get locked out and you can't get into the digital noosphere. Is that the Thierry de Chardin term? Noosphere? Yeah, the Matrix. There's many words for it, but you know what I'm talking about. Get yourself a big stack of physical books just in case. If there's one message that I want to put out on this channel, it's probably that. But with all that said, I'm still very glad to be back. I'm glad to be getting into a new book. I still love reading. I still love the possibilities that books represent, the things we could learn, the things we could know, and by extension, the things that we can then help other people learn about and understand. And I got a beautiful book for Christmas, and I've already been in touch with the author to try and set up an interview. I've got a few interviews with authors lined up, so I'm going to be bringing those to you over the next few months. So I'm very enthusiastic to keep doing my work, but I'm going to be keeping it simple and keeping it what it is and not really changing it. I think what I present and what I bring to you now is authentic. It's me. It's got my music on there that I recorded and wrote myself. It's got images and graphics that I made myself, and it's got a setup that I figured out how to do myself. And so I could polish it, I could improve it, I could smoothen the edges, I could make it more glitzy and glamorous and eye-catching, which is just another way to say addictive. But I think what I bring is authentic and real, and that's going to have a premium in the year 2026 and beyond, as we become more and more inundated with fake AI garbage, slop, nonsense. People who can put out a message that is authentic, that is not mediated by this demonic, potentially demonic technology, I think are going to fare well. And so the proof is in the pudding. We recently hit on the channel 2,000 subscribers, the dizzying heights of 2,000 subscribers. That is amazing. I had no idea that was ever possible when I started doing this. And so thank you to everybody who tunes in, who likes and comments and shares and participates in whatever way, shape, or form you do that. I sincerely am just flabbergasted that anybody out there enjoys this and sees the value in it in the same way that I do, because it means you understand the perilous environments and times that we're living in, and you recognize the importance of books, of good information, of information that predates the internet, that predates the mass media even, that predates certainly social media and AI slop garbage nonsense demonic portals and all the other stuff that we're heading into now. So thank you. Thank you to Turbs, Doris, Frank, and Tammy over on YouTube, and Zamal Xis00 on Rumble. I hope I pronounced your name right. But yes, welcome. Good to have you here. And good to have everybody here. And if you're watching on the replay, good to have you here in the future. I hope you enjoy the broadcast tonight very much. So, as you can see on the screen, we're going to be getting into Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Rene A. Wormser. I should say, one of the things that I'm going to be probably not doing in these Friday night broadcasts, and I apologize if this is disappointing to anybody out there, but I'm probably not going to be doing any much in the way of preamble rambles, much more than 20 or 30 minutes of actual rambling like this at the start, because I don't have time. I just don't have time to dig up and read other things and review them and mark them up and prepare them and get the tabs ready. I don't really have any like pre-show preparation time beyond setting up the live stream and taking a thumbnail picture. and that's pretty much all I have time for now. And so I'm probably going to be starting the live streams, talking for 20 or 30 minutes, waiting for people to figure out that we're live, waiting for people to cotton on to the video and join it, and then we'll just be getting into the book and reading the book and making it all about the books. One of the things off the back of this AI discussion that I've been reflecting on, and we've been talking about as well in the book club Telegram chat, is how rubbish all this AI generated content is. And I'm not talking about the video now, I'm talking about the text specifically. The video has its own problems, but it could be kind of mildly entertaining and interesting, but it's uncanny and weird, but only in the same way that certain films are, certain films that predate the AI technology. So the video, I kind of got a bit more time for it, but there's certain accounts where they're just churning out these long, rambling AI articles, and they're using these LLMs to do the research and scan the documents and come up with the summaries and analyze blah, 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 blah. And it's just so soulless, and it has no human touch to it. It has no personality. It has no emotion. It has no soul. And I don't like that stuff. And I think it's just going to be more and more and more of the written internet is going to be made up of that stuff. And so I feel like poring over Wikipedia pages or mainstream news articles or blog posts or Substacks or whatever and highlighting them and interpreting them, I don't think it's going to be as valuable anymore, now that most of that is probably not going to be written by humans, or at least half written by AI or whatever. So I'm going to double down on just looking at the books and looking at the pages and focusing on that. And just setting that example of let's unplug, let's do something that's a little retro, that's a little analog. Let's do something that is almost guaranteed not to be mediated by artificial information machines and software protocols. We don't know. I'll hold my hand up and I'll say, look, these LLMs have probably been around much longer than we've had access to them. And who knows what texts and books have been generated by software in the past and published and passed off. We don't know. We live in an era of complete deception, lies, and manipulation on every level you can possibly think of. So I wouldn't put it past the powers that shouldn't be to have been churning out books, stories, articles using these softwares for I don't know how long. Who knows? Who knows how long they've been doing it? That's my point. You look at some authors and how prolific they are, and you think maybe they had a little help. Maybe they got a team of writers. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe they've got an LLM. Maybe they've had super secret top access to an LLM, and that's how they've been managing to churn out all these I was going to say useless novels, but books are never useless. You can always set them on fire to help you keep warm if they're really that bad. You can always, there's plenty of things you can do. You could use them to wedge your door open if they're big enough and heavy enough, right? Door stop. Draft excluder, right? You could just stack them along the bottom of your door if there's a gap there and the cold air keeps coming in. So, yeah, there's things you can do. But who knows how long these technologies have been out there and being used against us. And I will say deliberately used against us because they're not here for our benefit. They're not here to help us move forward and make strides in our personal aspirations, our goals. But what I do see now is a lot of people selling that to you, right? It's I saw an ad recently for Tony Robbins and some other guys, AI accelerator, and last time they closed the doors, people went absolutely crazy because they still wanted to enroll. So we're reopening the doors for another cohort of our AI accelerator. It's going to change your life, make everything absolutely fantastic. Okay, I'm not going to be signing up for it. I have already been through Jack Spirko's what was it called? Become Dangerous with ChatGPT course. It was all right. It was not bad. It helped me get the continuity of control email series up and running. I will say that much. Also, I'd say it was worth the money. But everyone's going into that now. I see Tom Bilyeu, the impact theory guy. He's sacking everyone in his company and replacing them all with AI and teaching you how to do the same. So it's transforming everything. It's changing everybody. And ultimately, though, it's going to be, you got to see it as a weapon being used against us in the same way that screens are, in the same way that most technology is. Jason Horsley made a really great point with Hervoyer. I think it was in that conversation where he said, with technology, it's impossible to separate the good from the bad. You just get both, and you can't really get one without the other. And I think that's a very important point to bear in mind, because when you know something like the history of the internet as it's described and written in books such as Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, then you know that all this stuff comes from military, top secret military funding and budgets, and they're developing it for the purposes of war, killing, controlling, maiming, gaining resources, that kind of thing. And then eventually it gets turned and used on the general public because the governments don't, they don't represent you. They don't care about you. They see you as a herd to be managed, us as a herd to be managed. You know what I'm saying? They see you like I'm not part of the herd. I am. Moo. Bah. But they see they're not giving us this stuff because it's going to benefit us, right? It's all, think of each piece of technology as like a brick in the walls of your prison, not prism. That's the best way to think about it. So the cameras and the microphones and the screens and the internet connection and now the AI search engine results and the Amazon shopping and the Facebook and all this kind of stuff. Each one is just a brick and then another brick and then another brick, and everyone's going, oh wow, look at these bricks, they're so shiny and entertaining and convenient, and aren't these bricks really like great? And then, oh shit, we're in a prison. But the irony is that most people won't even realize they're in the prison when they are in the prison. They'll still be hooking themselves up to download their consciousness to a thumb drive so that they can live forever to be tortured by demonic AI programs. So, welcome to 2026. Let's read some books. Lee Blunt has just slid on into the YouTube chat, and Bitcoin mining as well. Good to have you both here. Also, don't worry about being late. You did miss some stuff, but you can go back and watch it on the replay, and you didn't miss, importantly, any reading of the book. So, Foundations, Their Power and Influence, Rene A. Wormser. I've got it open on the title page of the book because the front cover of the book is, it's blank. I don't have a dust cover for this. So we're pinning the page open so you can see the title and its full title as well, because it's not just called Foundations. It's specifically about the power and the influence of these organizations. And this book I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and I've been aware of it for quite some time, but I never got around to reading it. I just knew that it was important, and it captures a very important piece of history that if more people were aware of it, maybe they wouldn't be so willing and eager to accept some of the diktats and the what comes out of foundations, like the recommendations, the donations, what do they produce that people would reject? Because I'm thinking of the example of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? Back during the Big C event, 2020 up to 2024 or 3, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were coming under a lot of scrutiny. Bill Gates was coming under a lot of scrutiny. And yet, despite all the information that was released about him, people went along with his recommendations. He still has a documentary on Netflix called, I think it's called What's Next. And I put it on the other night and I watched the first 10 minutes. I turned it off in disgust because the first thing he talks about is like, he's saying, something totally unexpected happened. We gave birth to AI. And that was the first sentence or two sentences of the documentary. So I just turned it off and I was just like, okay, get rid of it. Thank you, Peter Kennedy, Political Policy Development. So if more people were aware of the history that's contained in this book, fewer people would be likely to go along with the policy recommendations of foundations, right? They would be put more scrutiny on the money. Where does it come from and where does it go? For example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gives a lot of money to UK media outlets, such as the BBC, such as The Guardian. So when you know that these media outlets, which is supposed to be unbiased and which is supposed to be objective, when you know they're getting funded by foundations and the people who set up and run the foundations are descended from eugenicists and population control enthusiasts, you might start to connect some dots and have some questions and have a little bit more skepticism. And so this book and reading through it, I think, is going to be a real watershed moment for me and for the channel and for everybody who takes part in it. So it's great to have you here if you're tuned in for part 1. It's quite a long book. I'm going to say that up front. So we're going to be chewing our way through this one. There you go, 400 pages. 400 pages. We're going to be chewing our way through this one for quite some time. And remember how long it took us to get through the tiny, slim Between Two Ages, which was only, well, actually that was a good 300 pages, but it took us a while. I have a feeling that it's going to take us quite a while to get through this one, but it's going to be worth it. And I'm really interested to do it. So I'll mention up front, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't been through a book with me on the channel before, please have a look at the playlists tab where you can see all the previous books that we've read. There's quite a number of them at this point, and one of them was The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by President of the Rockefeller Foundation, Raymond B. Fosdick. And we read through that, and quite interesting, quite revealing, quite amazing where the money from that foundation went. I think they're going to be making an appearance in this book. And so, with that said, let's get into it. This is Foundations, Their Power and Influence. Now, I was tipped off to this copy by a good friend of the channel who has donated books and gives me lots of tip-offs to first editions and good deals on secondhand books when he finds them. And he sent me this one because there's a lot of reprints of this one around and not so many original copies. So I immediately bought it. I got my, I don't think the price is here. I don't think he sent me back too much. Let's see. No, the price, it doesn't look like the price is on here, unfortunately. I don't think it sent me back too much, though. It wasn't crazy. But this is an editorial copy. This little insert here. And the stamp there is 17th of March, 1958. And it's been sent out, I don't know where, I don't know who received it, but it's with the compliments of Devin Adair Company. And it says, there's permission granted to quote up to 750 words. We're going to be quoting a lot more than that in this read through, but the Devin Adair Company, I'll just say, have put out a bunch of books that are very interesting. And this, when I look through my library and I scan the different publishers that I have on my shelves, all the Devin Adair books that I have look very interesting, and they seem to be publishing stuff that is a little more truth-oriented, less biased, less controlled, less representative of the powers that shouldn't be. A good example might be this one. So this is Who Killed the Congo by Philippa Schulia. That's Devin Adair as well. You can see on the bottom there, Devin Adair. And this one is referenced in Giera Griffin's book, Fearful Master. So it's all about the Congo and who killed it. And spoiler alert, kind of the UN. The UN was certainly involved. So that's just one example of Devin Adair books. I've got a few more. I've got one on the Romanovs and how they might have escaped and not all been massacred and murdered, as we are told. So yeah, Devin Adair Company, keep an eye out for those books. They're worth grabbing if you can. It's a 1958 publication. This is Foundations. So it predates the Brzezinski book we just read through. Interesting that Brzezinski doesn't mention anything really of Foundations in that whole forecast about what America's role in the post-industrial future is going to be. He didn't mention anything about foundations, despite the fact that some of the most powerful, influential foundations in the world originate from that country. He didn't seem to acknowledge or mention their role in the future of the country at all, but it's probably just an oversight. Probably just something he wasn't aware of, you know. And you can see here we got our 1958 copyright logo, and it says we got to have written permission to reproduce it. But I did look up the Devin Adair Company, and I don't think they're a company anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it to you. And, you know, if anyone's got a problem with that, I mean, if me reading this book on YouTube is a problem, you got to open your eyes and look around you at the times that we live in, my friend. So let's get into it. This is the preface. And let's see who the preface is by. I suppose it'll be... Okay, so this is Reese. Brazila Carol Reese. Oh, you can't see that. It's there. So the Reese Commission, or the Reese Committee, I should say, was tasked with investigating the foundations. And this book is an account of what they discovered. So having a preface from Brazila... It's a strange name, isn't it? Brazila Reese, whose name goes to the Reese Committee. He says, "The most difficult assignment of my 30 years in the Congress of the United States was the chairmanship of the Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations." Looking for my pencil. There it is. Informally referred to as the Reese Committee. This investigation required embarrassingly close scrutiny of the intellectual activities supported by the great and highly respected American names of Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Ford. As a minority member of the Cox Committee, which in the previous Congress had attempted but virtually abandoned this project, I had sensed the power that would spring up in opposition to a complete investigation. The obstacles were obvious from the first. We knew that in the influential liberal press, characterized by the New York Times, the New York Herald Tribune, and the Washington Post-Times-Herald, would throw its editorial power against the committee. We knew that even the bulk of the conservative press could not be unmindful of the enormous power of these foundations. We knew that many prominent educators, regardless of what they felt, could not be unmindful of the dependency of their institutions upon continued largesse from the foundations involved. We knew that the group of prominent men whose decisions would have to be judged extended even to intimates of the White House. But I felt that the work of the Cox Committee left several important unanswered questions, of which the gravest was, to what extent, if any, are the funds of the large foundations aiding and abetting Marxist tendencies in the United States and weakening the love which every American should have for his way of life and her way of life. I'll just add that in there. It was written in the 50s, so, you know. But yeah, aiding and abetting Marxist tendencies. So it sounds like this book's going to complement very nicely Fabian Freeway, very fearful master as well, Joe Griffin's book, all connected to Marxism and communism and socialism and these movements and how they were brought to the West. Well, they were created in the West, actually. So they weren't brought to the West. They were created in the West, but they were sort of created and incubated and then exported and then imported. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But anyway, continuing with the preface. So we set out to find the answers. We wanted to explore the problems of foundations by examining their actions, not their statements for the public. We felt that there are involved in the concepts under which foundations operate and grow in the United States certain dangers for the public welfare. We were not blind to the undoubted merits of the contributions of numerous tax-exempt foundations to worthwhile causes. It was our intention to find the factual basis for preserving their constructive functions and at the same time for supplying guidance for future legislation and administrative action against the use of foundation power for political ends. The story of that adventure, of what we found, and of the harassments to which we were subjected is included in this book by Rene A. Wormser, who was general counsel to the committee of which I was chairman and is widely recognized in America and Europe as outstanding in the field of estate planning and taxation. The book contributes essentially, however, the philosophical and juridical reflections of this distinguished lawyer, based upon the material our committee disclosed and upon other data which have appeared since the closing of our inquiry. He discusses problems of foundation administration and control, which are grave indeed, and has rendered a great service in preparing this sober and thoughtful work. So, always good to hear that the person who wrote the book is considered outstanding in their field. And the field is of the author, Rene Wormser, is estate planning and taxation. So sometimes it's good to have somebody's not too close to the area of operations to have a look and investigate these things, right? If he was a big wig in the fields of education or charity or scientific funding or whatever, then he would be less likely to be objective because he'd be more likely to have received money from these organizations at some point and be easier to pay off. But the fact that his area of expertise is kind of separate and outside lends a little bit of credence and authority to what is written in the book, in my opinion. Lee Blunt says, I have the abridged version of this book, so it'll be interesting to see the difference. Yes, it will indeed. See, this is why I like to get I feel so grateful to my good friend Bai for tipping me off to some of these first editions and earlier printed versions, because you never know what they leave out and edit from the abridged versions. And the same goes for anything that's written digitally on the internet, can be edited and changed anytime. And you don't know what was there before, and you go back to read it and it's gone or it's edited, and then you start to question yourself and your memory, and you're kind of being gaslit by the slippery nature of online content, and it's going to get increasingly worse and worse and worse. Whereas if you got the book in your possession, the physical book, and you can go back and look at it and check it out, it's less slippery. So let's continue with the introduction. In his column in the New York Daily News of December 21st, 1954, John O'Donnell said that the Reece Committee had the almost impossible task of telling the taxpayers that the incredible was, in fact, the truth. The incredible fact, he continued, was that the huge fortunes piled up by such industrial giants as John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and Henry Ford were today being used to destroy or discredit the free enterprise system which gave them birth. It is not easy to investigate foundations, not even for Congress to attempt it. The giant foundations are powerful and have powerful friends. A special committee was created by the House of Representatives of the 83rd Congress to investigate tax-exempt organizations. It is generally referred to as the Reece Committee after its chairman, Congressman B. Carroll Reece of Tennessee. It was a successor, in a way, to the Cox Committee, created by the previous Congress. The Reece Committee had perhaps the most hazardous career of any committee in the history of Congress. It survived its many perils, however, to bring to the attention of Congress and the people grave dangers to our society. These dangers relate chiefly to the use of foundation funds for political ends. They arise out of the accumulation of substantial economic power and of cultural influence in the hands of a class of administrators of tax-exempt funds established in perpetuity. An elite has thus emerged in control of gigantic financial resources operating outside of our democratic processes, which is willing and able to shape the future of this nation and of mankind in the image of its own value concepts. An unparalleled amount of power is concentrated increasingly in the hands of an interlocking and self-perpetuating group. Unlike the power of corporate management, it is unchecked by stockholders. Unlike the power of government, it is unchecked by the people. Unlike the power of churches, it is unchecked by any firmly established canons of value. So yeah, I think one thing that's very important to remember here is self-perpetuating group. Kind of just a bit like the class of bureaucrats, people who go into, lifetime career civil servants. They want to grow and expand the bureaucracy, which means growing and expanding all the rules and regulations and permits and requirements and laws and licenses and assessments and all this other stuff. Because, pushing pencils and papers is a lot easier than building houses or digging ditches or climbing pylons to fix overhead electrical cables and all these other kind of actual physical demanding jobs out there that keep things going. It's a lot easier to push pixels around. Back in the day, it would have been pencils and papers. And just perpetuate the need for that job to keep going, right? Everybody knows who's worked in corporations and government that you get a budget, and if you don't spend that budget, the budget gets cut. So every year you spend it and you say, oh, we ran out of money, we're going to need more money next year. And this is how it just keeps growing and growing and self-perpetuating, and you end up with this bureaucratic blob suffocating free enterprise, suffocating small businesses and medium businesses, suffocating people's lives because they're just surrounded by and wrapped up and mummified in red tape. So that self-perpetuating aspect reminds me of the fact that this is kind of it's another group. It's like another class in society, and they have their own interests, and they're out to make good for themselves and their friends. But the other important thing here as well is no stockholders, no people, and no canons of value, right? This is a new thing. This is a new thing, and it's not beholden to anybody. So, continuing. This book grew out of my conviction that some of the materials examined by the Reece Committee, for which I acted as general counsel, deserve broader circulation. My own reflections, based upon the committee's work and upon additional material and continued studies, might also contribute to a sharpening of the issues which deserve wide public consideration. The foundations which the committee investigated did not all carry that label. In addition to primary sources of foundation grants, such as the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the committee examined secondary distributors of grant monies, especially organizations such as the Social Science Research Council, the Institute of Pacific Relations, and the American Council on Education, which are supported by the major foundations and used in selecting ultimate recipients. Now, what's interesting to me about that one is here, the Institute of Pacific Relations, because those of us who are familiar with Alan Watt and his talks, he's very often talking about the Royal Institute for International Affairs and how it set up its sister organization in America, called it the Council on Foreign Relations because they couldn't get away with calling it the Royal Institute. But then these Institute of Pacific Relations popped up, and they popped up in other countries and all the other countries in the Commonwealth. And what I got recently, thanks to listening to a talk of Alan's, was this group of books. There's actually 5 of them. And these are... So I got this one because Alan reads from and talks about this. But these are... I'll show you the first one in the series. Right. This is the British Commonwealth Relations Proceedings of the First Unofficial Conference at Toronto, edited by Arnold J. Toynbee, the British Commonwealth Relations. So if you go inside and have a look, you see that it's... Oxford University Press, 1934, but it's here. It says, issued under the joint auspices of the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Canadian Institute of International Affairs on behalf of the first unofficial conference on British Commonwealth Relations. So the British and the Canadian Institutes of International Affairs. So as far as I could tell, there might be more, but I found 5. Right, there's the first, and we got the second here, which was called British Commonwealth in the Future. So that's the second unofficial conference. We got the third unofficial conference. This was called the British Commonwealth and World Society. So this is the third. You can see there in 1945. And then we got the fourth. Fourth unofficial conference, 1949. And lastly, we got the multiracial Commonwealth, and that's the 5th, 1954. So there's probably a lot more than 5, seeing as the ones I only got the ones up to 1954. But when I had a look in the second one here, and I'll see if I can find it quickly for you because it's relevant to our study today. Here, it says, the holding of the conference in Australia, or at all, was made possible only by the generous assistance we received from the governments of the Commonwealth and of the state of New South Wales, and also from the Carnegie Corporation and the Rhodes Trustees. I wish on behalf of the Australian Institute and on behalf of all the members of the conference to express our high appreciation of this assistance. Now, I'm not surprised the Rhodes trustees are involved in that, because that's Cecil Rhodes, and he bequeathed his will to the formation of the Rhodes Scholarships, and that went into the Milner Group and the Roundtable Group, and they were very much involved in the creation of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, right? But I was surprised to see the Carnegie Corporation mentioned here. I thought, why? Why is an American... Because the Americans weren't in the Commonwealth at this time, I don't think they've ever been in the Commonwealth, right? So why is an American corporation funding these unofficial conferences? Or at least one of them. I don't know if it funded any of the others, but interesting. And it stood out to me. And actually, if you look at this one, the list of the international affairs, the institutes that are involved, you've got the Royal, which is the UK. You've got Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India. and they all have Institute of International Affairs in their countries. And so when we go back to our foundations book, and they're talking about the Institute of Pacific Relations, you're starting to see this kind of pattern. These institutes and these foundations actually, maybe they are working very close together. Maybe they have some of the same aims, some of the same goals. We should bear that in mind as we kind of move forward in the book and learn about what these dodgy foundations were getting up to. But yeah, the Institute of Pacific Relations, I'm not sure if that became the Council on Foreign Relations, perhaps, or if it was adjacent to it, or I don't know. But not surprised to see it mentioned there. And that links the Carnegie Corporation also with the Royal Institute for International Affairs and these unofficial meetings to discuss the future of the British Commonwealth. So let's go back to a dictionary definition. No, hang on. Oh, yeah. A dictionary definition of the term foundation might run: an endowed institution, corporation, or charity. This would include colleges, hospitals, churches, and other institutions of a character far different from that of the foundations which we are dealing. These are essentially recipients of money for their own use and not in the business of handing out grants to others. They are, in relation to the foundations mentioned above, what the consumer is in relation to his supplier. Limited to the types of organization we have in mind, the total number now existing in the United States can be estimated at over 7,000. Most were created under state corporation laws, some as trusts, a very small number by federal charter. Accurate statistics are impossible to obtain, but the aggregate capital of these foundations seems to be about $9 billion, their income running into hundreds of millions per year. So remember, this is 1958, so you got to adjust your concept of how much $1 billion is worth accordingly. Total foundation wealth is generally underestimated. Some foundations, among them the Duke Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Ford Motor Company Fund, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, report their assets on a book value basis, market value usually being much higher. In the case of the Ford Foundation, the actual value of its assets turned out to have been 6 times their book value. Moreover, many foundations are vehicles for continued donations, whether by gift or legacy. They are in a state of growth. Indeed, some have only nominal capital today, but will contain vast sums on the deaths of those who created them. While there is much overlapping, foundations might be divided into 3 classes. Those which are purely granting foundations, those which use their money for their own research and operations, and those which might be called intermediaries, clearinghouses, or retailers for other foundations. Some of the intermediaries have no endowment and thus, strictly speaking, may not be foundations. However, they came within the committee's scope as tax-exempt organizations because of the practice of major foundations of delegating to them the selection of beneficiaries. Other classifications are possible, such as those foundations which have special purposes and those which are concerned with general research. In his recent book, Philanthropic Foundations, Mr. F. Emerson Andrews, an executive of the Russell Sage Foundation, says, quote, "Although the foundations that can now be classified as general research probably do not exceed 150 in number, they control more than half the assets of all foundations and are the ones most in the public eye. To a large degree, they are the leaders and standard setters for the foundation movement." The birth rate of foundations is rapidly accelerating. The Commissioner of Internal Revenue so testified, as would any expert in estate and business planning. The chief motivation in the creation of foundations has long ceased to be pure philanthropy. It is now predominantly tax avoidance or minimization. And there's a footnote here which says, "See the charitable trust as an instrument of estate planning." And that is either a book or an article by the same author, by Wormser as well. That'd be good to look that up, find out where it's from. The charitable the charitable tax exemptions were intended to advance the public welfare by offering exemption for philanthropic purposes. The increasing tax burden on income and estates has greatly accelerated a trend toward creation of foundations as instruments for the retention of control over capital assets that would otherwise be lost. The Internal Revenue Service, according to a press report, says it sometimes receives up to 10,000 applications a month for tax-free status. I mean, I get it. I don't want to pay taxes either. So I kind of empathize with this desire to get out of your, paying your gangsters not to put you in a cage. So that part of it I can see. But continuing, the creation of a new foundation very often serves the purpose of contributing to a favorable public opinion for the person or corporation that endows it. Among public relations consultants, the practice of publicly establishing the virtue of a previously despised person or institution by forming a tax-exempt foundation and beating the drum for it is quite common. Some of our largest foundations, established before the introduction of federal income and estate taxes, were created largely to glamorize a name not previously identified as conspicuously charitable. Mr. Andrews, in his Philanthropic Foundations, speaks of the mushroom growth of foundations in the past decade, 1945 to 1956. He attributes truly charitable motivations to many donors and mixed motives to others, but admits that many foundations are created for primarily selfish reasons and sometimes for fraudulent purposes. He sees it as obvious enough that tax reasons should stimulate the creation of foundations, pointing out that to the very rich, whose income is taxed at the highest brackets, a donation to a charitable purpose would cost in some instances only 9 cents per dollar. If gifts are made in the form of appreciated assets instead of money, stocks, land, or other property that has gained in value since its acquisition, the donor in the highest tax brackets will have more money left after the donation than if he himself had liquidated the asset, paid a 25% capital gains tax, and given nothing away. So that's pretty important. I mean, this is all important, but this is a way for very wealthy rich people to carry on being very wealthy and rich. But it's crazy, this loophole, I suppose you would call it, that giving stocks or land or property away can actually leave somebody richer. It's just funny, strange. Perhaps the best example of the use of foundations in estate and business planning is offered by the largest, the Ford Foundation. This foundation received about 90% of the stock of the Ford Motor Company, all non-voting stock. Had not the Ford family created this foundation, it would have had to dispose of a large part of its ownership in the Ford Company to the public. For it is hardly possible that the family had enough liquid capital to pay the hundreds of millions of estate taxes which would have been due upon the deaths of two proprietors, Henry Ford and his son, Edsel. It might have been difficult to make such a public sale without endangering their control of the company. The foundation, however, offered a way out. The family, by transferring about 90% of its Ford holdings to a foundation, escaped estate taxes on approximately 90% of its fortune. At the same time, it retained voting control of the company and had the satisfaction of knowing that even the non-voting stock was in friendly hands. When part of the foundation's holdings of Ford stock was sold in 1956 after being converted into voting stock, the distribution was carefully controlled to make sure that no large blocks would be held by any one investor. One reason behind this might have been the conviction that the more Ford stockholders there were, the more Ford customers and enthusiasts there would be. Another motivation might have been the simple one of not wishing any minority stockholder to acquire enough stock to make him too interested in challenging the management. In this manner, and by other uses of foundations, control of an enterprise is often retained by a family, while a huge part of a descendant's fortune is removed from death taxes. A direct donation to an existing philanthropic institution like a college or a church would save the same tax, but the creation of a foundation enables the family itself to have the pleasure, power, and satisfaction of managing the wealth donated to, quote, charity. There have been business abuses of the tax law, of course. The Rees Committee report gave one rather shocking example of a type of tax avoidance. This was the case of the Reed Foundation, which holds millions of dollars in notes of the publishing company which owns and publishes the New York Herald Tribune. These notes were transferred to the Reed Foundation partly by direct donation of the late Ogden M. Reed and partly by his will, the estate thus saving a large sum in death taxes. As the committee report said, quote, "It is the conclusion of this committee that what was intended was a business arrangement. We conclude that the foundation was not to be engaged solely in charitable work. It was to exercise charity in behalf of the New York Herald Tribune. It was to subordinate whatever philanthropic work had been planned to the welfare of that newspaper and the interest of the Reed family in it. It was a business deal. There was no free gift of the notes. They were transferred pursuant to a contract under which the foundation agreed to assist the publishing company in its financial problem and by inference, but clear inference, to make this objective superior to its presumed charitable function. It was the committee's opinion that no charitable exemption should have been allowed the Reed Foundation." The extent to which foundations are today being used, in a manner generally similar to that of the Ford Foundation, to solve the problem of paying death taxes when a major part of the assets of the estate consist of stock in a closely held corporation, largely prompted me to include this comment in an address at the University of Chicago in 1952. Quote, "It seems to me that the ingenious legal creatures developed by tax experts to solve the unusual social, economic, and legal problems of the past several generations will become Frankensteins, though perhaps benevolent ones. It is possible that in 50 or 100 years, a great part of American industry will be controlled by pension and profit-sharing trusts and foundations, and a large part of the balance by insurance companies and labor unions. What eventual repercussions may come from such a development one can only guess. It may be that we will in this manner reach some form of society similar to socialism without consciously intending it. Or it may be to protect ourselves against the strictures which such concentrations of power can effect, that we might have to enact legislation analogous to the statutes of mortmain, which centuries ago were deemed necessary in order to prevent all England's wealth from passing into the hands of the church." It's interesting that he foresaw some form of socialism coming in. The overwhelming majority of foundations have had careers quite beyond any criticism, and some of those which have been most criticized have notable accomplishments to their credit. The work of both the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations in some fields of medicine, public health, and science, for example, deserves the thanks of the American people. Many unquestionably commendable accomplishments should not, however, immunize a foundation from criticism for mistakes involving what may be termed a breach of trust. It's kind of like how you scam or deceive or manipulate people. You give them a certain amount of truth, and then you slip them the lie or the falsehood or the nonsense with that truth. It's how a lot of counterintelligence operatives work, I believe. Because, you put out a lot of good truth and then you spin people off into an area of just fantasy. And that's how you do it. And unless you gave a certain amount of truth that was believable and verifiable and clearly factual, then people wouldn't go along with you to the nonsense place of stupid, fake explanations and information. So it's a similar kind of thing. It's like you do some good stuff, some obviously, notably, undeniably good stuff with your foundation. Meanwhile, backstage and elsewhere, the parts of the activities that aren't under the public eye and getting talked about in the headlines and newspapers and media, that's where you're doing your dirty work. So continuing here, it is in the fields of education, international affairs, and what are called the social sciences that the greatest damage can be done to our society. For this reason, the Reese Committee confined its inquiry almost entirely to these areas. Okay, so we're going to be looking at education, international affairs, and social sciences. They're the three areas. I think they picked some pretty good areas to focus on. Foundations achieve their tax-exempt status, even their initial license to exist, because they are dedicated in one way or another to the public welfare. They must be so dedicated. The state laws which govern the creation of foundations give considerable latitude. The donor is permitted to satisfy his idiosyncrasies, if he cares to, by designating purposes limited to certain classes of beneficiaries and certain classes of benefactions, as long as the whole operation is truly philanthropic. The federal tax law, in turn, is equally generous in permitting even idiosyncratic philanthropies to qualify for tax exemption. Underlying both the state and federal laws applying to foundations, however, is the concept of public dedication, a fund administered by fiduciaries, whether called trustees or directors, for public benefit. The tax relief which foundations and their donors enjoy causes the public to pay more taxes than would be the case if the exemptions were not granted. Now that's a very important key part, isn't it? It's like tax money, but the public's tax money is funding these, because you got to make up the loss. The money that you would be getting in taxes from these organizations has got to be found from somewhere else, so you rinse the public. Consequently, and because foundations are public trusts, and there's a footnote here which says, objection is sometimes made to calling a foundation a public trust. However, while it is privately administered, it is public in the sense that it must be dedicated to the public. The public is its beneficiary. So consequently, and because foundations are public trusts, the public has the right to expect those who operate them to exercise the highest degree of fiduciary responsibility. A study of the place of foundations in our society calls for an initial clarification of the method applied in such an inquiry. Obviously, the great variety of foundation goals and activities makes it impossible to apply the sampling procedures so fashionable among contemporary social scientists. One cannot arrive at a quantitatively correct description of all foundations from examination of a selected number. Consequently, the investigator must be satisfied with an opportunity to arrive at conclusions regarding possible merits and demerits of foundation practices by examination of a reasonably large number of cases. The result will be a better understanding of the principles of human behavior involved in operating tax-exempt activities, and a more practical approach to the formulation and application of the law protecting the public interest. Limited as it was by time and money, the Reese Committee could attempt only a partial investigation of some of the less desirable features of foundation management in the United States. So this is only what's following is only a partial investigation. So we'll bear that in mind as well. Its main contribution was to expose instances in which the promotion of political ends, favored perhaps by foundation managers, had been disguised as charitable or educational activity. Political activity of this kind endangers the future of the foundation as an institution. The often stormy hearings of the Rees Committee stimulated a widespread re-examination of the goals and methods of major foundations. In the resulting public discussion, even some of the most stalwart supporters of the criticised foundations were obliged to admit certain deficiencies. Indeed, some major changes in personnel and in operating policies ensued. The following pages are offered as a contribution towards a better understanding of the public issues arising out of the existence of powerful tax-exempt institutions. They point to some of the abuses of the past to illustrate the dangers inherent in the absence of effective measures for preventing political activity by foundations. That is the end of the introduction by Rene A. Wormser. I've got a bunch of comments over on Rumble and YouTube, and I appreciate that. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm happy to see people chucking stuff in there and taking part. 'Tis lovely indeed. So, let's have a quick look at the contents and see what is coming up over the next few weeks and probably months. Definitely months. It's going to take us probably at least 2 months, 3 months to get through this. So we got 9 chapters and some appendices. Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C. First is coming up the study of foundations. And that's going to be about 40 pages. We might get that done today. 41 pages. It's doable. We'll see. Then we've got the power of the individual foundation is the second chapter. Third is the concentration of power. 4 is social science and scientism. Now it's interesting to see the word scientism there, because I didn't realize people used that in books, certainly not serious books like this. I always thought of scientism as just a sort of a play on the pseudo-religion of science and the worship of men in white coats and people with big numbers and fancy machines and computer models and that sort of thing. So interesting to see the word scientism used there. There's one here that catches my eye. Foundations generate, quote, the proper study of mankind. That's going to be an interesting chapter for sure. After that's chapter 5, Foundations and Radicalism in Education. Chapter 6 is Revolution is Nearly Accomplished. Chapter 7 is Foundation Impact on Foreign Policy. That's going to be another very good one with internationalism. And then this is where it talks about Carnegie and the Institute of Pacific Relations, globalism, experts, propaganda for the UN. Ooh, I feel like maybe we should just jump straight to chapter 7. That's the one that sounds juicy and interesting to me. But you know how we do it on this channel. We start at the front cover and we work our way to the back cover. So after chapter 7, but I am looking forward to that one. And then we got chapter 8, which is the Ford Foundation, Gargantua of Philanthropy. And then chapter 9 is From Here On. So I suppose that'll be, that's recommendations. There's a plea to the trustees. And I wonder if any follow-up research has ever been done. I wonder if, kind of in the way that Juan Ratiu continued Carol Quigley and Rose Martin's work with his book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, which we read through on the channel. That's on the playlist tab. I wonder if anyone's ever followed this up. What's happened in the 50 years since, and it would be interesting to know if anyone had done that. And then the appendix includes findings and concluding observations of the Rees Committee and also the story of the Rees Committee, which the story of the Rees Committee is 50 pages. So just thumbing through the contents there, I'm pretty excited to read this. There's a few things in here that I'm looking forward to learning more about. But as I said, we start at the beginning and we work our way through. It's old school, this channel, in case you haven't figured that out yet. So we're going to begin right now. In fact, I'm going to have a little sip first. Please excuse me while I wet my whistle. We're going to begin. Remember as well, if you want to support the stream at any point allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. It's pinned at the top of the chats on Rumble and also on YouTube. And you can find all the links there you need, really, to see what I do, to see how I get paid, to see how to get in touch with me, to sign up to various things that I've put out. I'm not going to go through them all right now. Most people probably heard it 50 times already, at least. So, foundations, their power and influence. Chapter 1, the study of foundations. Congressional investigation is not enough. When the 82nd Congress appointed a select committee to investigate foundations, this committee was directed to conduct a full and complete investigation and study of educational and philanthropic foundations and other comparable organizations which are exempt from federal income taxation. The committee, later known as the Cox Committee, was instructed, quote, to determine which such foundations and organizations are using their resources for purposes other than the purposes for which they were established, and especially to determine which such foundations and organizations are using their resources for un-American and subversive activities, or for purposes not in the interest or tradition of the United States. Similarly, the Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations and comparable organizations, appointed by the 83rd Congress, the Reese Committee, was instructed to make a study of the use of such resources for un-American and subversive activities, for political purposes, propaganda, or attempts to influence legislation. Consequently, both House committees in their observations concentrated largely on alleged subversive aspects of foundation activities. Continuing. Like all studies by congressional committees, the investigations took place in an atmosphere of some political passion. The clash of personalities, outside efforts to prevent a full airing of the problems of foundations, the short time available for research and hearings, and the absence of sufficient funds substantially impaired committee work. Yet, these congressional committees have accomplished much. They have pointed up the importance of tax-exempt organizations in our social structure. They have disclosed serious weaknesses and dangers. They have exposed a great number of unexplored problems arising out of foundation activity, but they have not finished the study which the social importance of foundations requires. The American Foundation is a social invention created to contribute to the improvement of the public welfare. Like any invention, it creates new situations, changing with the tides of our social life. The impact of foundation programs and operations in many of the focal areas of our civilization requires constant re-evaluation. Congressional committees can contribute very substantially to such appraisal. The significance of tax-exempt private organizations transcends the importance of occasional or frequent errors of judgment committed by foundation trustees or their managers. These institutions may exert political influence, support subversion, or exhibit tendencies conflicting with our national traditions. The emergence of richly endowed juridical persons with self-perpetuating boards of directors, free from any formal responsibility for their policies and actions, and growing in number and wealth, deserves the fullest attention of all who are concerned for the future of our republic. There are substantial dissimilarities between the purposes, characteristics, and operators of the various organizations. A stereotype picture of what the foundations have contributed or are guilty of will always do injustice to some. Congressional reports, by necessity, highlight certain features of a limited number of tax-exempt foundations and are likely to invite generalizations from a few explored data. But a typical foundation is as non-existent as an average man or an average corporation in real life. Furthermore, as it is with human beings and their societies, the individual foundation itself undergoes change. What may be true of specific intentions and performance today may not be true any longer tomorrow. The emphasis of the Rees Committee on the need for further study came from the recognition of the existence of many more problems than the one it touched upon, but the far from completed investigation did disclose sufficient instances of questionable practices to permit an understanding of some of the general precautions that ought to be applied to foundation management. The committee sought out guiding principles for future foundation behavior rather than grounds for punishing past errors. If, therefore, this study will use some of the less flattering data on tax-exempt operations uncovered by the congressional investigation, the purpose is not to create a stereotyped prejudice against foundations in general. It is rather to record the possible dangers to the public welfare, and so in the end to serve the interest of foundations in their continued service to the public better than complacent silence would do. So ironic, really, isn't it, that they have to investigate these foundations for dangers to the public welfare when the conditions for setting them up is that you serve the public with them. So the next section is the Walsh Commission. The problems of foundations are not new. They have been aired by congressional inquiry before. The manner of their exploration has always reflected the concern of the day with specific dangers to the public welfare. The Commission on Industrial Relations examined foundations more than 40 years ago under a congressional act of August 23, 1912. Wow. So it seems like a real ongoing thing in America, because there was the Cox Commission before, the Rees Commission, and then there was the Commission on Industrial Relations back in 1912. So it's almost like this has been known and it keeps going on and they keep investigating it, but it keeps carrying on and continuing. Decades and decades and decades of these kinds of shenanigans. Its main purpose was to study labor conditions and the treatment of workers by major industrial firms. Starting with a study of labor exploitation, it went on to investigate concentrations of economic power, interlocking directorates, and the role of the then relatively new large charitable foundations, especially of Carnegie and Rockefeller, as instruments of power concentration. The fears of foundation power prevalent in that generation are best expressed by the statement to the Commission made by a prominent lawyer and student of social problems who later became a justice of the Supreme Court, Louis D. Brandeis. We've come across that name before, for sure. I'm not sure where, though. Maybe Fabian Freeway? I'm going to have to look that up. But yeah, Louis Brandeis testified on January the 23rd, 1915, as to why he was gravely concerned with the growth of concentrated economic power. He spoke of corporate power first, then of what appeared to him a similar problem in relation to the large foundations. He said, quote, "But when a great financial power is developed, when there exist these powerful organizations which can successfully summon forces from all parts of the country, which can afford to use tremendous amounts of money in any conflict to carry out what they deem to be their business principle, and can also afford to suffer losses, you have necessarily a condition of inequality between the two contending forces. The result in the cases of these large corporations may be to develop a benevolent absolutism, but it is an absolutism all the same, and it is that which makes the great corporation so dangerous. There develops within the state a state so powerful, so there develops within the capital S state, lowercase s state, so powerful that the ordinary social and industrial forces existing are insufficient to cope with it." And so that was 1915, right? Brandeis is talking about this. Think about where we are in 2026, where we have some corporations that have a higher turnover in terms of money and productivity than some countries. Yeah. So it's been known that this could happen. It's been known the danger of letting these corporations get too big and too powerful and too influential and to amass too much influence. It's been known for over 100 years. People have been warning about it for over 100 years. Still, it happens anyway. just happens anyway. So whenever, and the reason I mention that is that whenever anyone says to you, whenever they have this sort of, what would you call it, like a view of history where things are unplanned and things just spontaneously happened, and there's just this occurring of events one after the other, and nobody could have seen it happening. You know, just like George Bush talking on, the 9th of November, about the 9th of November attacks, where he said nobody could have ever imagined flying planes into buildings. Nobody could have imagined that ever happening. This is what some people's view of the whole of history is like. Like, nobody could have ever imagined we'd end up where we are today in 2026. Well, I disagree completely. And I think where we are today has been fully imagined and planned and war-gamed and mapped out and thought about and understood way before we got here by the people who do that sort of thing. So there, just a little tangent there. We'll go back to the text. Brandeis said that foundations express a desire, a zealous purpose to aid humanity. So it's so noble and good of them. But he also stated that he felt a, quote, grave apprehension at times as to what might ultimately be the effect of these foundations when the control shall have passed out of the hands of those who at present are administering them to those who may not be governed by the excellent intent of the creators. He reiterated his fear of abuse of power and termed the whole system inconsistent with our democratic aspirations. At these hearings, hang on just for a second as well, just assuming excellent intent of the creators, when you know that they're tax exempt and you know that the creators can use these as vehicles of wealth preservation, it's a bit sickly to hear that kind of like, oh, the excellent intent of the creators. It's a bit, what's the word? I can't. The word is escaping me right now, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. It's this fawning adoration for very wealthy, powerful people, assuming they have these noble. They just care so much about the rest of us, like the Bill Gates of this world and the Elon Musks of this world. They're just working so hard for our free speech and our health, because that's what they care about most. That's what keeps them up at night. Yeah, right. Anyway, back to the text. At these hearings, under the chairmanship of Senator Frank P. Walsh, a great number of other prominent witnesses appeared and testified on their ideas and observations regarding foundations. Samuel Untermeyer, counsel to the U.S. Steel Corporation and himself a prominent philanthropist, stated his belief in the capitalist system. He attributed the propaganda success of socialism, communism, and syndicalism to the blunders of capitalism. He saw a remedy in the enlightened self-interest of capitalists that would lead to social reforms. Criticizing the Rockefeller, Sage, and Carnegie foundations, he said, quote, "The Rockefeller Foundation sought a federal charter, but was not satisfied with the terms it was offered by Congress. It wanted our fundamental laws against perpetuities ignored and repealed so far as concerned its powers and limitations. It promptly secured from the New York State Legislature what Congress refused to grant. The Sage and Carnegie foundations did the same. If New York had not given them what they wanted, they would have passed along from state to state until they found a corporate habitation on their own terms, without in the least interfering with their operating wherever they chose. This ought not to be possible." Mr. Untermeyer did not share the fear and distrust of foundations expressed by others. He believed in the unselfish public spirit of their founders. and saw them doing incalculable public good and no harm. He advocated, however, that they should 1. Be organized under a uniform federal law instead of under special state charters, 2. Not be given perpetual charters because of the possibility that entirely different social structures and conceptions of education in 50 years might make these institutions appear most repugnant, 3. Be limited in their size, 4. Not be permitted to accumulate income. He also advocated, 5. That the government should be represented when the time comes for replacing the present trustees. That named Samuel Untermeyer also rings a bell, but these are sensible propositions, aren't they? Dr. John Haynes Holmes, an eminent Protestant minister, testified to his concern with the power of the self-perpetuating foundation boards. Quote, "We have here in the midst of a society supposed to be democratic, that which is essentially an autocratic system of administration of an institution which represents power which is, of course, simply stupendous, and that relationship, therefore, of the most serious character to mankind, the autocratic administration on one hand, and the democratic administration of government upon the other." All of these quotes, by the way, are from the 64th Congress First Session Senate document, I think. Oh no, these are all from the Walsh Commission hearings. Apologies. Which looks like there's roughly 8,000 pages of those. We won't be reading those on the live stream anytime soon. So continuing, he contended that a democratic society did not need the services of outside agencies, quote, to study a community from its own standpoint and to apply remedies from funds at its disposal. He feared greatly the, quote, paralysis of the possibilities of democracy when powerful foundations take over. Dr. Holmes, as it appears, was an ardent advocate of cooperative socialism and represented what today would be called liberalism. He recommended appointment of foundation trustees by the government. He was so much opposed to the large foundations that he would rather see democracy die of its own corruption than be favored by the autocratic benefaction or service of any one particular individual. John D. Rockefeller Jr. testified that as a corporate director, he had represented foundation investments as well as his family interests on the boards of directors of several corporations. He had given considerable study to the question of the relation of private benevolence to social and economic conditions. Testifying for several days, beginning on June the 25th, 1915, he answered the question whether large foundations constituted a possible menace either to the general cause of education or to the industrial welfare of the people. He said, quote, "These foundations, as is true of all modern corporations, are subject to the reserved power of legislative bodies which created them, to modify or repeal their charters whenever the public interests require." Asked whether he saw any dangers in interlocking directorates of foundations, he replied, "I should think, on the other hand, there might be a great strength in that," and generally spoke in favor of multiple services of the same persons as directors of several foundations. In essence, he recognized the public's right to know and through legislation to control foundation activities. He advocated voluntary public reports of federally chartered foundations on fiscal matters, but not introduction of a law requiring such reports. He wanted to leave the contents of such reports to the judgment of the directors and to their understanding of the public interest. He did not think that any method of public inspection was desirable or necessary. Of course he didn't. It's like, oh, we'll just investigate ourselves. You know, and the police do that. We investigate ourselves and we're not guilty. Like, yeah, we'll tell you what we're up to, but not because but we shouldn't be required to by law. We'll just do it voluntarily, and we'll tell you the truth, honest. Asked about the power of foundations to influence independent thought and action in the investigation of social conditions, Mr. Rockefeller said there should be no public restrictions. None whatsoever. He contended that proper selection of directors would sufficiently protect the public interest and that the financial power of large foundations would be felt only in the realm of investment. He advocated academic freedom and complete independence in the use of grants by recipient educational institutions. So that's academic freedom and complete independence. Chairman Walsh was concerned lest the granting of funds for schools might result in, quote, persons being educated taking the viewpoint consciously or unconsciously of the man that gave the money or the foundation that gave the money. That's a sensible point to make. Mr. Rockefeller, with regard to higher education, answered, quote, there is a possible danger if the giver retains any kind of control. I think it unwise. Regarding other forms of education, however, he considered continued help in developing the middle school system as desirable and as involving much more remote danger. In 1915, when these opinions were expressed, obviously nobody expected the emergence of intermediary organizations serving foundations in the distribution of grants and their resulting power in the academic world. Progressive education, soon to be favored by substantial support, was in its infancy. Was in its infancy. I don't know why I can't get that phrase out of my mouth. What has been called the patronage network of Teachers College of Columbia University had not yet conquered the organizations of the teachers with the aid of tax-exempt donations, approving the principle of public control and implicitly future congressional study of foundations. Mr. Rockefeller said that it was never contemplated that his father or his associates, quote, could continue to have their influence felt. But at any time, in any generation, when the board having the charge of such a foundation is not, in the judgment of the public, a proper board, the legislation can introduce an amendment limiting, qualifying, or modifying the method of electing directors and adding at that time any restriction which it may think desirable. It was Mr. Rockefeller's thought to leave each generation to put up such barriers and safeguards as it may think necessary at that time. In its final report, Mr. Basil M. Manley, the Director of Research of the Commission on Industrial Relations, dealt at length with foundation problems. Commissioners Weinstock, Ballard, and Ashton, while dissenting and calling the report partisan and unfair regarding certain labor issues, concurred in its conclusions regarding the foundations. Concerned with the concentration of wealth and influence, the report concluded from the evidence examined that a small number of wealthy and powerful financiers held in their hands the final control of American industry. That control, through actual stock ownership, in spite of the large number of stockholders, rested with a very small number of persons, and that in each great basic industry, a single large corporation dominated the market. So, quite a, what's changed in 100 years? Not a whole lot. In these respects, the Commission set the pattern for future investigations of big business, among them the studies of the Temporary National Economic Committee and many successors. Its observations have been adopted and repeated by many succeeding reformers, including the theorists of the New Deal, though the changes of our economic power structure and legislative reforms have substantially altered the conditions of business since 1915. Many of the conclusions of the Foundation critics of 1915 have lost their cogency because of evolutions in the social structure. Foundations, too, have changed. We may no longer fear them as instruments of capitalism. Today, many fear them as promoters of big government. Yet, under totally... That's interesting, isn't it? So in the 50s, people were scared of too much government. It sounds like people were a little more switched on and sensible in the 50s than they are today. Yet, under totally different economic and social conditions, the findings of 1915 are still significant. They point to essential peculiarities of private endowments manifest in any social climate, irrespective of the current fashions of contemporary social criticism or of current political trends. The report of Mr. Manley for the majority of the Commission saw the domination by the men in whose hands the final control of a large part of American industry rests rapidly extended to control the education and social service of the nation. Referring especially to Rockefeller's and Carnegie's foundations, it said, quote, "The control is being extended largely through the creation of enormous privately managed funds for indefinite purposes, hereinafter designated foundations, by the endowment of colleges and universities, by the creation of funds for pensioning teachers, by contributions to private charities, as well as through controlling or influencing the public press." So they got their tentacles in the media as well. Of course they do. The funds of these foundations are exempt from taxation, yet during the life of their founders are subject to their dictation for any purpose other than commercial profit. So it's social engineering, isn't it? It's managing and changing society, manipulating minds and controlling people, groups, and you can then shape society in such a way as to benefit you or your offspring in the future, your future generations or your friends, right? So it's all about social control and manipulation, I think. It's not just about making money and making the bank account get larger. After a certain point, more money is not going to make much difference to your lifestyle once you've already hit the dizzying heights of wealth accumulation. Then you start to look around and say, okay, how can I consolidate this and ensure that future generations, my generations, my offspring, the valuable bloodlines that I am part of, they can continue to enjoy that wealth and control off long into the future. Back to the quote. "In the case of the Rockefeller Group of foundations, the absolute control of the funds and of the activities of the institutions, now and in perpetuity, rests with Mr. Rockefeller, his son, and whomsoever they may appoint as their successors. The control of these funds has been widely published as being in the hands of eminent educators and publicly spirited citizens. In the case of the Rockefeller foundations, however, the majority of the trustees of the funds are salaried employees of Mr. Rockefeller or the foundations, who are subject to personal dictation and may be removed at any moment." The report expresses concern that the policies of these foundations must be inevitably colored, if not controlled, to conform to the policies of the corporations in whose securities their endowment was invested. On the reasoning that these funds were the result of wealth created by exploiting either American workers or American consumers, it was concluded that the funds therefore by every right belong to the American people. Concern was expressed about the practically unlimited powers of these foundations. In discussing the Rockefeller Foundation, President Sherman of Cornell, himself a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation, said that one of these tax-exempt organizations was free to participate in practically any activity concerning the life and work of the nation, with the exception of activities for profit. Among the permitted foundation activities he listed, defense of the Republic in time of war, economic and political reforms which the trustees deem essential to the vitality and efficiency of the Republic in time of peace, championship for free trade or protectionism, advocacy of socialism or individualism, underwriting the respective programs of the Republican or the Democratic parties, introduction of Buddhism in the United States. The absence of legally enforceable public control was seen in the report. Yeah, nothing there about Christianity, interestingly. The absence of legally enforceable public control was seen in the report as an important deficiency because past experience indicates that the public can be aroused only when the abuses have become so great as to constitute a scandal. After listing examples of the alleged use of the Rockefeller foundations as instruments for advancement of the Rockefeller business interests, The report reviews the extent of the possible influence of these foundations and private endowments on institutions for education and public service. Evidence in the possession of the Commission supported the following complaints. 1. That the Bureau of Municipal Research of New York adopted a definite line of policy to meet the conditions imposed by Mr. Rockefeller in connection with proposed contributions. And 2. That several colleges and universities abandoned their sectarian affiliations and charter clauses relating to religion in order to secure endowments from the Carnegie Corporation. This led the report to comment, quote, "It would seem conclusive that if an institution will willingly abandon its religious affiliations through influence of these foundations, it will even more easily conform to their will any other part of its organization or teaching." The report concluded, "As regards the foundations created for unlimited general purposes and endowed with enormous resources, their ultimate possibilities are so grave a menace, not only as regards their own activities and influence, but also the benumbing effect which they have on private citizens and public bodies, that if they could be clearly differentiated from other forms of voluntary altruistic effort, it would be desirable to recommend their abolition." It was therefore recommended that Congress enact legislation limiting the amount of funds and the exercise of power by fund managers, provisions against accumulation of unexpended income and against expenditure in any year of more than 10% of capital were demanded, together with rigid inspection of finances and complete publicity through open reports to the government. In addition, the report proposed the creation of an investigatory body for the continued study of activities of foundations and of their affiliates. Finally, the recommendations called for increased government activity in education and the social services to balance the power of foundations. Commissioners John R. Commons and Florence J. Harriman, in their separate report, requested a further investigation of foundations before new legislation was adopted. They recommended a study of endowed charities, religious organizations, universities, and colleges. They concluded it would be a misfortune if private endowments, unless plainly shown to have committed abuses, should be prohibited. There should be, however, no alliance between these private foundations or endowments and the government. The state or government should neither subsidize them, nor be subsidized by them, nor cooperate with them. Such cooperation has often led to public scandal. Instead of calling upon private foundations for help, the government should treat them as competitors. No effort on the part of government officials to secure financial assistance from them should be allowed. Well, they're certainly not competitors in 2026, and they weren't in 2024. More like partners in crime and collaborators. So we've got a next section here, which is the Textron investigation and business abuses. But before we go on to that, it's quite interesting that these investigations of foundations and skepticism about how they should be, whether or not they should exist, and how they're going to be used, and the kind of powers and influence that they should have, it goes back to at least 1912. So this is not a new thing in 1958, or it was not a new thing for the Reese committee. The Textron investigation and business abuses. Congressional investigations have on occasion given sharp attention to improper business uses of foundations. In 1948, for example, a subcommittee of the Senate Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce investigated the operations of the Textron Corporation, which had used several tax-exempt foundations in complex business manipulations. Essentially, the Textron idea was to provide tax-free shelter for business interests, but in organizations which could remain under control. The investigation opened the eyes of many to the extent to which foundations could be and had been used in tax evasion and tax avoidance. It disturbed this congressional committee that no agency of government had any information of consequence on the subject, nor any data regarding the resultant unfair competitive advantages enjoyed by foundations operating in business fields. The committee expressed concern over the number of family foundations and quoted Fortune magazine, which had described the practices of these organizations as excessively secretive. These organizations were apparently considered by the families which controlled them to be their own private affair. The committee castigated this secretiveness as unjustified and indefensible, as such foundations received their preferred tax treatment from society and hence owed a definite obligation to satisfy their public sanction. The Senate committee endorsed two recommendations which had been offered by the Russell Sage Foundation: that compulsory reporting of financial and other operational activities of foundations be required, and that tax exemption be restricted to organizations with an active program of public welfare. The Textron disclosures and studies of other abuses of the tax laws through the use of charitable foundations led to a strengthening of the Internal Revenue Code. It's no longer as easy as it was to use foundations for business manipulations intended to evade or avoid the imposition of taxes. It is not the purpose of this study, however, to discuss the business or tax avoidance use of foundations in detail. The Internal Revenue Service seems alert to the problem involved and is likely to propose successive corrective legislative measures whenever new business abuses of the tax exemption privilege appear. My concern is with the cultural and intellectual aspects of foundation activity. It is in the field of ideas that foundations exert the greatest influence on our lives and on the future of our country. The field of ideas. It's the importance and the primacy of the mind, right? And how you think and what you believe. From this comes action and behavior. And so that's why the field of ideas or the battlefield of ideas, as it might better be thought of, is so important. This is a field in which private inquiry should be encouraged. Congress is limited in its authority and in its approach. Almost all foundations are created under state law, and their rights and privileges are for the most part determined by state law. The leverage of the Congress in attempting to hold them to proper activity rests almost solely in the tax laws. The federal government has no power to regulate foundations in a direct way. It can only withhold the privilege of exemption from federal taxes if they do not meet certain criteria of conduct delineated by the tax statutes. Under these and associated handicaps, a congressional inquiry cannot hope to do the thorough study which the subject requires. The Cox and Rees committees did touch on some of the major cultural and intellectual aspects of foundation operation, but in this area, private inquiry could promise wider and even more penetrating study. Congressional investigation of foundation activity should continue. The subject is too grave to suffer congressional neglect. On the other hand, the searching minds of students who are unconcerned with political consequences could contribute much to an understanding of the impact of foundations on public affairs and the consequent hazards. So the next section is the social significance of tax-exempt institutions. Many authors have found a challenging object of study in the social implications of charitable activity by juridical persons. Charity is a virtue attributed to physical persons. The great religions since time immemorial have identified it with personal salvation as a concern of lay institutions organized to dispense benefaction to the poor and deserving. It is of a more recent nature. Originating with religious bodies, organized charity has been used as an instrument of power from time to time over the centuries by its administrators. Is the potential of power of a great and wealthy charitable organization any the less a danger because it has no religious affiliation? Humanity has found that even a religious identity has not always kept powerful charitable organizations from conflicting with the public interest. This conflict frequently required action by the sovereign against a power position established under the guise of religious charity. Usually, the curbing of privileged and tax-exempt charitable organizations took place because of their economic power. But there are also instances of intercession by the government for the declared reason that such bodies, established for charity, frequently exercised thought control. Right, there you go. The battlefield of ideas. Indeed, there have been few instances in which both these motives have not been present simultaneously in varying proportions. In 767, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine Copronymus, after first attempting to tax the holdings of the numerous monasteries which had become too powerful, confiscated their properties, which had been donated by generations of Christians for charitable purposes and pious causes. He started a pattern of secularization which was often repeated by popes, kings, and revolutionary governments. On May the 6th, 1312, Pope Clement V dissolved the very powerful order of the Knights Templar. The Templars had become a symbol of charity and culture. They had also grown enormously wealthy and had become a very strong influence in the Western world. By the 12th century, they had come to own 9,000 manors and had become rich to obvious excess. Their contributions to the security and civilization of Europe, their performance during the Crusades, were soon forgotten. Acting in concert with the princes, the Pope suppressed the order. It had antagonized the secular states by its enormous aggregation of tax-exempt wealth, and the Church by some of its heretical beliefs and practices. Like some of our modern foundations, it had gone into politics. A later pope, referring to this precedent in dissolving the Jesuit order, described the consequences of excessive wealth and influence as general disrepute. The roots of the Reformation were not in dogma alone. It gave the princes an opportunity to secularize the property of the Church. At the time of the reign of Henry VIII in England, the Church held 2/3 of the votes in the House of Lords, owned 1/3 of the land and the best of it, and possessed an income 2.5 times that of the Crown. The Spanish Crown, facing an increasing shrinkage of taxable land in the American colonies, forbade transfers of real property to religious institutions. Such institutions already owned about half the real estate in Mexico. Several Catholic powers, sometimes with the very approval of the Church, confiscated property accumulated from charitable donations and legacies in the hands of religious orders and societies. It was in 1773 that Pope Clement XIV dissolved the Jesuit order, which had already been expelled from Spain, France, and Portugal. This order had contributed very substantially to the preservation of the Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation. Its charitable activities were immeasurable. In education, it had created methods of teaching and institutions of learning unexcelled at the time and exemplary even today. But its wealth and influence had aroused bitter and powerful resentment. This resentment lay partly in the political activity of some of the guiding managers of the order. As a friendly historian put it, quote, "Their disobedience to the rule to abstain from politics besmirched the name of the society and destroyed the good work of the other Jesuits, who were faithfully carrying out their own proper duties." A less friendly historian commented, quote, "Their perpetual meddling in politics and even in speculation and finance stank in the nostrils of every government in Europe, while their high-handedness and corrupt greed in the matters of ecclesiastical privileges and patronage alienated the clergy." Islamic nations had their share of the problem of vast accumulations of wealth in religious organizations. Such accumulations, against the background of increasing population and decreasing free arable lands, made eventual confiscation inevitable. The increasing loss of revenue through the growth of the tax-exempt rolls made the problem more acute. The pious sultans of the Ottoman Empire contributed to the problem by donating land consistently to religious foundations. Upon each conquest, they regularly separated 1/5 of their new territories for the use of charitable foundations. When the Ottoman Empire fell, 2/3 of all real property in its domains was owned by religious foundations. The withdrawal of such property from circulation and from taxation was one of the causes of the empire's downfall. Critical students of foundations have always been concerned with their potential of power. In modern times, however, changing political concepts have sometimes produced special criticism related to the trends of the moment. In 1950, Prime Minister Attlee of England appointed a committee to investigate charitable trusts. It questioned the merits and the place of voluntary charitable endowments in a welfare state. It concluded, however, that they must be given room and opportunity to contribute to the search for social advances. At the time, there were some 110,000 charitable trusts in England, 30,000 of them in the field of education. In 1930 appeared a book written by Frederick P. Keppel, The Foundation, Its Place in American Life. Dr. Keppel, a former dean of Columbia College and a leading exponent and manager of foundations, reviewed the relative responsibilities of private endowments and government. He conceived of foundations as clearinghouses for ideas, holding that they must be willing to take the initiative and must show courage as well as prudence. They must, he said, be ever on guard against indulging in propaganda, even virtuous propaganda. He obviously saw the danger of political identification in charitable work, mindful of the suspicions disclosed by the Walsh Commission's hearings on industrial relations. There may have been some inconsistency in that he implored foundations not to wait for applications, but to initiate their own programs, while at the same time he cautioned them against propaganda. Dr. Keppel agreed with Beardsley Rummel, another eminent foundation manager. Quote, "In general, private funds are most appropriately used for work of a more experimental character or for activities not a public responsibility." He supported the proposition that foundation money... That's interesting that they're talking about experimental works. He supported the proposition that foundation money should be used as venture capital in matters concerning welfare and culture. He advocated reliance on expert advisory boards, acting as intermediaries for foundations, presumably competent to counsel on the relative merits of applications and the proper priority of causes. In taking this position, Dr. Keppel may have been partly responsible for many of the foundation practices relating to patronage and the selection of projects which have come under recent severe criticism, yet he himself said, quote, "The administrative camel has crowded the intellectual pilgrim out of his tent," at the same time that he referred to criticism of bureaucratic practices as often unreasonable criticism. Dr. Keppel encouraged a pattern of operation which tends to make foundations the ultimate guides and judges of merits in the intellectual world. He did this by implying that foundation trustees and managers should and could assume leadership in the realm of ideas with the help of intermediary expert organizations supported in turn by foundation funds. So it's about bringing in the experts and funding them with the money bequeathed to these tax-exempt organizations. Edward C. Lindemann, another leader in the world of tax-exempt organizations, reviewed foundation significance in his book Wealth and Culture. Whereas the report of the Walsh Committee had expressed mainly the fear of capitalist political machinations by the large foundations, Lindemann, then a socialist, seems to have believed in and approved of their power to contribute towards social change. He said, quote, "The new state of the future will need social technicians who will be asked to engage in cultural planning, just as technological experts and economists will be called upon to plan for orderly material production and distribution. Those who have exercised a similar function during the individualist competitive phase of modern economy have been to a very large extent associated with foundations and trusts. Consequently, it becomes pertinent to discover how these culture determiners have operated in the past. Lindemann presented the true facts of life in the relation between foundations and the recipients of support. His observations are in conflict with the apologetic contentions of those managers of endowments who testified in later congressional hearings that they did not interfere with the intellectual pursuits of grantees. Foundations, he says, do not merely exercise powers over those who accept their money. Such influence is obvious even when the foundation making grants insists on the contrary. A more subtle and much more widespread control comes about by reason of the multitude of indirect relationships in which foundations play a part. Those who accept foundation grants often turn out to be radical critics in private of the control which has been exercised over them and their programs. Those who live in anticipation of receiving foundation grants are more servile. Another device for projecting foundation control has become popular in recent years. Foundations frequently supply the initial funds for a new project, these funds to be used for exploratory and conferencing purposes. In many cases, the foundation acts as host for such preparatory groups. By the time the final project is formulated, it becomes clear that nothing will be proposed or performed which may be interpreted as a challenge to the orthodox conception of value which characterizes foundations as a whole. Very few important cultural projects of any size are consummated in this country without having experienced either direct or indirect impact of foundation, philosophy, and influence. Wow, that's quite a claim. Very few important cultural projects have occurred without being impacted by foundations. Here we have an expression of concern, not any longer with economic power or political intention to protect capitalism, but generally with the control of thought practiced by the dispensers of financial support. So another word for that is mind control. Lindemann, too, was suspicious of the secrecy under which so many endowments operate. He expressed surprise to discover that those who managed foundations and trusts did not wish to have these instruments investigated by his privately conducted survey. He felt that as semi-public institutions, they owed the public information about their activities. Looking at them as symbols of surplus wealth, he considered them, quote, a consistently conservative element in our civilization. Speaking of trustees, he condemned the, quote, repugnant arrogance of those who presume to impose cultural norms upon a society on no basis of warrant other than their pecuniary success under the dispensation of a competitive economy. In a decent society, creative persons should not be expected to debase themselves as persons in order to gain the economic security which permits them to work. When they do so, their true creativeness evaporates with tragic suddenness. The change in prevalent fashions of thinking and in the social climate arising during and after the Depression altered the style of foundation performance so much that later analysts of their impact on our culture have more and more expressed their concern at a record of anti-conservative performance. A generation of critics that feared the adverse effect of capitalistic bias of trustees was succeeded by observers who, from their study of the support of ideas and organizations by tax-exempt foundations, concluded that foundations had become the breeding ground for socialist and related political movements and action. This more recent generation of students, while equally impressed with the potentials of control of education and of public affairs in general by self-perpetuating wealthy organizations beyond public control, has become concerned over the danger of foundation support of various undesirable concepts and movements having political implications. Among these are the ideas of the welfare state, the principles of economic determinism, excesses in the promotion of progressive education, the impairment of our national sovereignty, and even subversion. Hence the support by a majority in Congress of both the Cox and Rees Committee inquiries. Frank Hughes, in his book Prejudice and the Press, in connection with an analysis of the report of the Hutchins-Luce Commission on Freedom of the Press, points to the emergence of professional foundation executives as the group actually in control of the billions of dollars of foundation resources. He suggests that the businessmen holding positions as trustees had abandoned their responsibility to a professional class of administrators. As authority for this contention, he quotes a book by Harrison and Andrews, both of the Russell Sage Foundation. Quote, "The primary function of the Board of Trustees is the broad determination of policies in harmony with the Foundation's charter. However completely authority has been vested in the board, it is neither the time nor usually the special knowledge required for detailed administration of the work of larger foundations. Because administrators come from teaching and administrative jobs in colleges and universities," he says virtually all are educators or former educators, Hughes argues that they exhibit the pro-government bias prevalent in university circles. He attributes this to the big business nature of higher learning and its dependence on government favour and government support. In the influence of the administrators on the choice of causes and recipients supported by grants, Hughes sees a real danger to the Republic. He accuses foundations of commonly practicing interlocking management together with some of the large universities, of giving money with exceptions only to supervised projects, of acting as and supporting propaganda agencies, of making little money available to foster individual and independent thought and research. A more tight and monopolistic control of great wealth would be hard to find in any other segment of American economy. Their interlocking with the boards of large universities is documented by numerous names of multiple trusteeship holders. He points to the invasion of foundation boards of trustees by the trustees of universities, in addition to the emergence of university teachers as the professional managers of foundations. He quotes a study that found 54 trusteeships in 29 foundations held by men who were also trustees of universities. Frank Hughes fears for the freedom of America. He is a conservative, but his criticism, like that of the generation of Senator Walsh or Edward C. Lindemann, is essentially based on the abstract fear of bigness and concentration of power as a political factor. Like earlier students of foundations, he is concerned with foundation support of selected political ideas and favoured institutions. Like his predecessors from the opposing political camp, he gives insufficient attention to the impact of foundation giving on cultural patterns and on the motivations for creativity. Whether one agrees with the political bias of today's or yesterday's analysts of the impact of tax-exempt organizations on public affairs, the problem of the relationship between money and creative genius demands more examination. Such examination has been undertaken recently, among others, by William H. White, Jr., an editor of Fortune magazine, in his book, The Organization Man, which I have a copy of, actually. Let me just grab it. It's a real nice, like, messed up old paperback. So William H. White Jr. did this book, The Organization Man. Doubleday Anchor, 1956 there. And that's one that I think would also be very interesting. 430 pages, but you've got the ideology, the training, the neuroses of Organization Man, the testing, the organization scientist. There you've got the foundations and projectism. Some interesting sounding topics here. It says it's the first complete study in a way of life that many Americans are now leading and that many more are likely to lead. It is life under the protection of the big organization, the corporation. The government, perhaps the university, charitable organization, or labor union. Here, modern Americans find the jobs that promise security and a high standard of living, and Mr. White believes give up the hopes and ambitions that dominated earlier generations of Americans. So an interesting thesis, the effect that working in these large organizations has on us, because we have to mold ourselves to fit these organizations. It's they're, I often say they're corporations, and the word corporation has the same root as corpse, meaning it's a dead thing, it's a dead entity. And corporation is like corpse oration being a voice, right? So it's a dead voice. So the living man working for and serving the corpse oration, the voice of the dead, or the corporation, the dead entity, can't be good for the living man or woman at all. So I think that'd be a really good one to get into at some point. $1.45 back in the day. Back in the 50s. But it's just amazing what was written about and explained and pointed out so long ago, and then totally ignored. so that we end up where we are today. But back to chapter 1. White, who had previously covered the story of the Ford Foundation in magazine articles, is well informed about current foundation practices. In his book, he deals with the disastrous impact of organization techniques on the life of America. He attributes them to a growing force for conformism, threatening in the end to destroy all vestiges of genius, individual responsibility, and initiative, and with them the concepts of individual independence and liberty so dear to earlier generations. In the corporate mechanics of the foundations, he sees one of the most menacing trends resulting from the social patterns of an age controlled by organization bureaucrats. He contends that the flow of really good ideas and scientific achievement is hindered rather than advanced by the habitual bigness of corporation or foundation-supported research projects. America, he says, has been borrowing ideas from Europe, especially in basic research, from nations favored neither by large industrial research operations nor by the bounty of giant tax-exempt foundations. Organization support favors team research. Our learned journals are increasingly publishing papers by 2 or more authors, indicating a preference for group performance over individual problem study. Planning of scientific work by committee has become the accepted pattern. Consequently, scientists do not merely submit their findings to the judgment of others, as has been the case through the ages of learned discourse. They now depend on others, also in the early stage, when they decide what specific problems to investigate. Even if committees of organization functionaries do not form an interlocking directorate, according to White, they are, quote, a reflection of the concentrations of influences normal in the academic world, but for that very reason, the ambitious younger man, and scientists are just as ambitious as anybody else, takes his cues from these guides, and those who prefer to look into the questions unasked by others need a good bit of intellectual fortitude to do so. White believes that the distraction offered by the lure of funds for organization-favored projects seriously impairs the creative potential of our scientists. He quotes an example of a meeting of 20 top scientists in a particular field for the purpose of listening to the plans of a chairman of a great foundation. About 8 of these men were on the verge of some really important work, he reports, but as no indication of interests in the preferences of the scientist was given by the foundation chairman, the meeting dealt only with his plans and projects calling for fresh starts. The feeling prevailed that the work to be financed by the foundation would be in the long run a net subtraction of the scientific assets previously accumulated by the participating scholars. White fears the consequences of such usurpation of the basic role of the scientist by a scientific and fund bureaucracy. The most fertile new ideas, he says, quoting L.L. White, are those which transcend established specialized methods and treat some new problem as a single task. Cooperative groups, from great industrial concerns to small research teams, inevitably tend to rely on what is already acceptable as common ground. The increasing dependence of research on support by grants forces scientists into a vicious circle, described by Kurt Richter of Johns Hopkins in the following words quoted from W.H. White, Jr. Quote, "In making application for a grant before World War II, a few lines or at most a paragraph or two sufficed for the experimental design. Now it may extend over 6 to 8 single-spaced typewritten pages, and even then, committee members may come back for more details. Under these circumstances, passing the buck has come to be practiced very widely. Projects are passed from committee, to my knowledge in one instance 6 committees, largely because at no place along the line did anyone believe that he had adequate information to come to a firm decision." The control imposed on a scientist by the so it's this like gradual, if you know, I'll coin another term as well, Kafkaization of things. And I talk to friends quite regularly about this, just how ridiculous it is to try and get anything done in this day and age, because you've got to speak to a robot and leave a message, and they might call you back, but they might not. And then the options on the automated phone menu don't suit your circumstances. And if you do get to talk to someone, they might be on a different continent with a very heavy accent, and they can't understand your accent, and you're going around in circles, and they can't fix your problem, so they hang up on you, or you get cut off and you ring back and you have to explain the whole thing again. And it's just become this Kafkaesque sort of reality of bureaucrats and bureaucracy and administrators. And we knew it was coming, or people knew it was coming because they wrote books about it 70 years ago even. So back to the text. What did I get up to? Just here, was it? The control imposed on a scientist by the requirement that his research designs be approved by the members of numerous giant committees will bring his ideas down to the lowest intellectual common denominator. So I'm reminded now of like Rupert Sheldrake and his banned TED Talk about the assumptions baked into the modern scientific approach, methodology. What is it called? The book's called The Science Delusion that he wrote about that. I think there's 7 or 8 assumptions that he covers in his TED Talk, and that was I mean, they took it off the TED website, I think, but you can still get it quite easily on YouTube. Other people have downloaded it and re-uploaded it, so it's out there. But Sheldrake did talk about this. But yeah, this passing it around, the more people you get involved, the closer it has to get to that baseline lowest common denominator, right? So and that applies to everything. That applies to all manner of things. You know, in some ways, I'm glad that my channel is the numbers on my channel are so small, because it means the people who are showing up and participating really do have an attention span, and they are interested, and they do care about this stuff. If I was to start changing things and trying to appeal to a broader and a bigger audience, I'd have to dumb it down a little bit, because the way you get higher numbers is to dumb things down closer and closer to the lowest common denominator, right? So if you want the really, really very biggest numbers, then you just got to like make funny cat videos or outrageous, partisan, divisive type of content, you know, or sex always sells, or there's things that appeal to the broadest, widest number of people, and you go for that. But I don't like playing those games. I don't like making those changes, because for the same reason as what he's talking about here. It's like it dumbs things down. It gets you closer to the lowest common denominator, and it stunts and it blunts the message and what you're trying to say, because you have to take into account that the closer you get to the lowest common denominator, the higher the risk you run of offending somebody, of somebody out there getting offended and causing a stink and getting embroiled in some sort of ridiculous controversy, you know, for saying the wrong word or not having the correct view or opinion, or saying the right thing about a certain topic. I don't know, but It's better to be in a niche and find your people who can hear your message and appreciate it and resonate with it and want to stick around and listen to it, right? So he says, the ideas will come down to the lowest common denominator by passing around all these giant committees. Then it will impose on him the most powerful pressure to conform to a pattern of mediocrity. White ridicules the argument presented for scientific teamwork, that the group, even in the realm of thought, is superior to the individual. The foundations have not responded to the challenge to invigorate individual research. Instead of countering the bureaucratization of research, they are intensifying it. There you go. So it's about establishing and reinforcing the consensus reality. Yeah. So, continuing. It's no wonder that so many creative individuals have been conditioned to abandon individual projects. The climate produced in the world of ideas by the large foundations upon whose support so many scholars must rely for their research is not favorable to individual projects. Such scholars are often seduced into group research because of the difficulty of getting individual grants and because of the financial lure of generous foundation subsidy for large projects. It's interesting that, isn't it, that individuals can't get supported, but groups can. It's showing you that one thing in and of itself shows you that tilt towards collectivism, towards groupthink, hive mind type behaviors and practices and endeavors. Just that one little factoid and an aspect of it on its own shows you that. This lure draws many away from potentially creative work and the pursuit of new discovery and leads them into sterile fields tended by conformists. White states that, with few exceptions, the Guggenheim Foundations being an outstanding one, the great foundations concentrate their giving on institutions and on big team projects. Where individual grants are eventually contemplated, these foundations generally rely on other organizations and institutions to select from among applications. White gives this shocking example of projectitis and the neglect of the individual researcher. He says that he approached 13 top sociologists not working on currently fashionable problems, but who were thought first-rate. He found that 7 had applied to one of the big 3 foundations, Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie, for grants, and all but 1 had been turned down. He said that, with one exception, they all felt they would not get sympathetic consideration by these foundations. In pointing out their achievements, foundations offer a long list of contributions made by their grantees in the sciences and a shorter list of outstanding foundation-supported accomplishments in the arts. Yet, again and again, they have been severely criticized for the general sterility of their products and for the tendency to elaborate old ideas instead of venturing into the daring unorthodoxies. There's a footnote on explaining the use of this term, which is, my use of this term, unorthodoxies, requires explanation. What is orthodox today may be daring tomorrow, and what was daring 20 or 30 years ago may be orthodox today. A certain form of liberalism is certainly orthodox in intellectual circles. White points out what has become a bureaucratic feature of this big project process fostered by most of the large foundations, the tendency toward project self-perpetuation. He says, quote, "Many a project gets to a point where its main reason for being is to produce more research to justify a grant for more research." He quotes J.A. Gengarelli, head of the psychology department of the University of California, Los Angeles. Quote, "We have a social force that selectively encourages and rewards the scientific hack. There is a great hustle and bustle, a rushing back and forth to scientific conferences, a great plethora of $50,000 grants for $100 ideas. I am suggesting that scientific technical, and financial facilities are such in this country as to encourage a great number of mediocrities to go into science and to seduce even those with creative talent and imagination to a mistaken view of the nature of the scientific enterprise. The unquestionable merits of a substantial part of what foundations have done and continue to do for the public welfare should not absolve them from criticism whenever their chosen preferences or the unintended byproducts of their manner of operation develop into dangers to the Republic. Such dangers have been demonstrated by public investigators and by private observers in the potential and real influence of foundation power in the field of politics. To this observation has now been added a fear of the far-reaching influence of foundation-controlled money in the realm of ideas and on patterns of creative behavior of scientists and artists. Whether foundation managers like to admit their influence or not, foundation giving most obviously has an enormous impact on education, on social thinking, and ultimately on political action. This influence reaches the public through the schools and academies, through publicity, and through educational and other associations dedicated to public and international affairs. Foundations per se are neither good nor bad. It is the people who run them who must account morally to the public. It is these managers who are responsible for foundation performance. The laws under which foundations operate are, to say the least, imperfect. But a reform of the law can impose only negative checks and balances on foundation spending and can never convert juridical persons to a truly creative pattern of action. Short of hampering foundations to a point of ineffectiveness, all the legislator can do is to protect the public against certain abuses of power. Only the trustees and managers of foundations themselves can direct the application of tax-exempt funds more intelligently to the public welfare. Like they're ever going to do that. I'm going to see how long the next section is. We might just leave it there. Ooh, interesting stuff coming up. Oh, on this page, they're talking about the League for Industrial Democracy. We definitely learned about that in Fabian Freeway. It's one acronym that always sticks in my head, the LID. The League for Industrial Democracy. Interesting. So that's coming up a little bit later. What is propaganda and what is education? What is religious? Foundation responsibility in supporting social change. The power of the individual foundation. I would like to push on and finish the rest of this chapter, but my throat's getting sore. That's what happens when I take a few weeks off live streaming, you see. So I think we'll just leave it there for now. The next section that we'll read on Friday is foundation responsibility, but the one we just read there, I thought was very good. I didn't know we were going to get so much history. I didn't know there was so much history, and that investigations into these organizations had been carried out before. I didn't know there was so much skepticism and suspicion directed towards these organizations. And I didn't know that a book that I already had a copy of was going to get mentioned. And that's always good. It's always nice to know that the books you have refer to each other and complement each other, and that this is why I like buying new books, because then you often find a bunch of books mentioned in the footnotes and the bibliography, and you can go after and find those. So, yeah, a good start indeed. Bitcoin mining, good start to 2026. I think a good start to the book as well. We made a dent in it because we did also read the little introduction here and was it called the preface? Yeah, the preface. So we did a good 30 pages, maybe more like 35. But yeah, quite a few different commissions that have investigated these organizations before. A variety of suspicions aimed at them, from, money and wealth preservation for the people who have that, all the way to left-leaning political bias, right-leaning political bias, and then that bit at the end there about the standardization of scientific research, because you can only research what is what you can get paid to research. That's the thing, isn't it? It's like you can't just go out and research stuff. You need money because you got to buy equipment, you got to pay your bills. So the fact that they can dole out this cash and decide who gets it means that they can fund what scientific breakthroughs are or are not made. And now if you are the Rockefellers and you have all this money in oil, for example, and you have all this wealth and control and influence in the production of oil, then you start funding certain scientists who do certain research into various health conditions, and then you start creating pharmaceutical products, which are very closely related to oil and its byproducts after processing. And you can see how the things knit together, and you could see how investigating things such as the placebo effect, even though it's accounted for in every study, it's not investigated to the point of let's teach people how to do this. Like, we know that your mind can heal you. We know that you can take a sugar pill and believe that it's going to heal you, and that belief heals you. But we don't teach people how to harness that innate power of using their belief to heal themselves. Don't you? That would be surely the most bang for your buck if you really wanted to make people healthier and if you really wanted to make people free of illness and disease. But of course, that is not the purpose of the medical system and the medical paradigm that we live in, is it? The purpose is to keep you on the medical merry-go-round, as I call it, keep you going back for more, keep you going back for more appointments, more prescriptions, more injections, pills, potions, lotions, all that kind of thing. Because these are products. These products are created by companies, and these companies are profit-driven. And if you can fund the research and the education to push people towards this certain paradigm, get people using your products that you're trying to shift, that you've invested in, then that's all well and good. That's a pretty good business model. You're getting people from both sides. And you can keep that going for a very long time, it seems. Now I'm reminded, I think it's this book here. Let me just grab it. Got too many on this upper shelf here. Two to look at. So one, I'll just remind people that the story of the Rockefeller Foundation, Raymond B. Fosdick, we read it through on the channel. Check out the playlist tab. A lot of interesting stuff in there. It's about time I go back and re-listen to that because it was a while ago. But yeah, a lot of interesting revelations about where that money was going because they get to decide where it goes, right? So there you are. But in this one, this is another book. It's called John D., A Portrait in Oils. Which is a very clever title, isn't it? Do you get it? Oils? Yeah? See what they did there with that? So John D., A Portrait in Oils. This is a 1929 book. John D. Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Trust have provoked a literature and a litigation of their own. So it's telling you about John D. Rockefeller and his dad, Dr. William A. Rockefeller. And basically, I'll show you this with the book count if I can just pull it over again. Basically, what this book says is that Dr. William A. Rockefeller was going around selling cancer cures. He was a snake oil salesman. That's literally what he was. And this is a little, this is one of his advertisements. He was going around and handing out to people. And like it says here, like most quack remedies, the concoction was practically harmless. However, Doc Rockefeller, if you'd known him for 5 minutes, you'd just naturally call him either Doc or Bill, had other ways of witching dollars into his pocket. So this is the guy who, this is the father of the man who set up the Rockefeller Foundation, so the apples don't fall far from the trees, do they? But yeah, snake oil, that's a big business. And to go back to mentioning the placebo effect, like you've got that on your side, because you know that no matter what garbage you give to people, a certain number of them are going to take it and feel better because they believe it's going to help them. And therefore you can point to them and say, see, my stuff works. And the ones who it doesn't work for, you be like, oh, we don't know, maybe it's a gene thing, maybe there's something wrong with you, and that's the reason why it doesn't work, you see. So it's a real it's a real con game, the whole health and wellness. And then on the other side of it, they know that once people cotton onto this, they're going to go the other way. And then you've got all your supplements and your gadgets and your gizmos and your Alex Jones super krill oil or whatever it is that he sells people. And then you go into that whole camp and start experimenting with that stuff, which I've done as well. I've gone through a whole phase of taking various supplements, and so they got something for everybody. They got the whole thing sewn up. But the truth is that the power of your belief can heal you, or if not heal you completely, at least alleviate your symptoms and create symptoms. You can have the nocebo effect as well, right? Doctors tell people they've got 3 weeks to live, and then 3 weeks later, the people drop dead, and it turns out they had nothing wrong with them. This has been known to happen too. So belief's incredibly powerful. You got to guard it. You got to think very carefully about where your beliefs come from and what you believe in and why you have your beliefs, and take this into account. And I think it's very relevant when you're setting up your foundation and you're choosing who to give grants to. You're thinking about your other business interests. You're thinking about your other investments, the other products that you've put money behind. If you can get the scientists to do some research which shows that the thing you're invested in is good for people, of course you would prefer that. And then that other point as well about them prioritizing group research rather than individual research, quite amazing too. That links into the things we just read there about foundations being suspected of subversion and pushing and serving a Marxist agenda. So it's going to link in very nicely with our Fabian Freeway book, I think, which was written 8 years after this one. That's going to tie in really well. It's going to tie in with story of the Rockefeller Foundation, of course, as I just mentioned. And yeah, as Turb says, I think it's going to be another eye-opening belter. So yes, definitely shout out to Bai for showing me where to get hopefully unabridged and original copy of the book. I think it's unabridged. And thank you all for being here and checking out the first part of tonight's reading. It is going to be a good one. I have a feeling that we're going to... Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to show you between two edges there. I thought we'd all moved on from the... from the scary, what do you call it, sigil on the front of that book. Here, we'll go to the title page instead. So yeah, I think it's going to be another good one. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up. Scientism, the international relations aspect. It's going to tie a lot of things together. And that's the nice thing about what we do on the channel. As we read more books, we can find the ways they overlap and complement each other and refer and to other things that other people have written. And in this way, we gradually build out, our understanding and our map and our of history, of reality, and then we can more accurately understand the world and how it works today and where it's heading, right? Because I'm sure the same kinds of shenanigans are going on. And as I said, it'd be good to look into more up-to-date modern studies of foundations. And because for example, I've just finished reading, about a week ago actually, I've just finished reading the Philip K. Dick novel, A Scanner Darkly, which was made into a really good film, a very faithful adaptation of the book, starring Woody Harrelson, Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, and Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. But I'd never read the book. So I'd seen the film many times, never read the book. I read the book, and the film's that is bang on, really. It's dead on. It's very, very faithful. And the book is it's pretty powerful. It's quite short, very easy to read. You can whiz through it quickly. But it's kind of harrowing because it all deals with like surveillance and addiction and schizophrenia or schizophrenic type of experience that one of the characters goes through, and paranoia and all this sort of stuff connected with the drug culture. But in this world that he's writing about, and he wrote it in the 70s, and it's I mean, he wrote it in 1977, I think, but his depiction of the surveillance and the techniques and the surveillance technology is crazy. Amazing foresight that the man had when he was penning these sci-fi stories. And there's this drug going around, and they know that it comes from they know the source is organic, so it comes from some sort of plant. And this is covered in the film as well. Spoiler alerts if you if you haven't read or seen the film. But it turns out that the producers of this plant, which is a drug that's causing all these problems, it turns out to be a foundation. And I thought it was a really nice synchronicity when I read this. And then it's also reflected in the C.S. Lewis trilogy, the space trilogy, or the cosmic trilogy, depending on what you want to name it. But I just finished discussing that with Melissa. We're discussing this one next, by the way. And I finished discussing the space trilogy with Melissa, and the quote unquote bad guys belong to the NICE, which is the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments, right? So it's a foundation type of organization. They're involved in philanthropy, but they're scientific and they're carrying out experiments. So where did the money come from? That wasn't actually covered by C.S. Lewis, but certainly the mentality. This group, they're into vivisection and finding out ways to keep severed body parts alive. And the more you read, the more links and connections you can make that tie together not just the nonfiction, but also the fiction as well. And then you can see why Alan Watt said so often that fiction is one of the main vehicles of social engineering. It's one of the main ways to make people think and behave differently, and to shape their expectations about the future, and to make them go along with the agendas that you've got planned and that you're going to roll out over the next 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years. Okay, so yeah, I think it's all tying together and knitting together very nicely. And with that said, I'm going to call it a night. So thank you to Gelner and Zamalex is O on Rumble, Bitcoin Mining, Turbs, Lee, Tammy, Frank, and Heidi popped in, Dars as well. We also had further up Ginger, and I think that's everybody. Peter Kennedy was here as well. Thank you all for hanging in there and spending this time with me on a Friday night. It's lovely indeed. So I hope you all have wonderful weekends and a good upcoming week. Please, if you find value in the stream and what I'm doing, consider supporting in some way, shape, or form. It's allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews and the other various links that you can see going along the bottom there. Shoot me an email, get in touch if you've got a recommendation for a book to read or an author to interview. I'm looking to line up more author interviews this year. As I said, I've got quite a list already. I've started reaching out, but I don't know everybody and I don't know all the best books. So if you've got recommendations or something to put on my radar, please get in touch. Or if you just got any feedback or a question, I like to hear from people and I like to get to know who's out there. Continuityofcontrol.com. That's my 9-part email series where you'll get some of the most outrageous and crazy quotes from establishment voices delivered to your inbox on a weekly basis. And that's a 9-week series, 3 to 5 minute reads each week. And some of the tastiest, spiciest, juiciest quotes showing the continuity of control, showing how it goes back It goes back much further than I cover in that email series, but I take it back to H.G. Wells and his book, The Open Conspiracy, and I follow the breadcrumbs all the way up to David Rockefeller's book, Memoirs. I got some good feedback for that, and that's out there if you want to use that too. And the other thing is the online book club. We meet Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We're reading through Political Ponerology, which is the science of evil, how it takes over through and how it's related to psychopathy. It's quite an academic book, but it's got some really interesting stuff in there that makes you see things in a very different light, particularly people you might know or work with or be related to. So that's quite an interesting book as well. So I'm going to leave it there. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Give me a like, comment, share, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. It helps. And thank you all for hanging out and helping me get to 2,000 subscribers. And I'm sure we've got a very exciting year ahead of interviews and book readings and who knows what else. So we will find out together. So thank you for being here. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. I hope you do good things. Be good to yourself. Be good to the people around you. Have care and compassion and kindness and warmth and love and generosity because, we're here for a very short time and we're all going to be dead at some point. We're going to be moving on to some other realm, perhaps some other dimension. Who knows? Maybe we'll come back here to this one in another meat suit of some description. So, don't worry so much. Don't fret so much. Don't be so fearful. There's more to fear in your imagination than there is in actual 3D reality around you, depending on where you live, of course. But I assume that people who are living in really dangerous, horrible places aren't tuning into Hayes Reviews on a Friday night. So, yeah, be thankful for what you got. Be grateful for your internet connection and your relative safety and warmth and some food in your belly maybe, and maybe a cold beer or a cup of tea or whatever it is, because there's more to be grateful for than I think we notice on a day-to-day basis, because we're kind of trained to see the negative and the bad and worry and fret and all that kind of stuff. So we got to balance that out a little bit sometimes. So that's my closing message for today. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, God bless.